Now at section 3, called Modest Proposals. And you'll remember Modest Proposal is based in Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal, which was sarcastic, right? I mean, it was facetious, where he was suggesting that the Irish, who were having a terrible famine, should cook and eat their children, since they had so many of them. And it was initially published anonymously. Anyway, that's where we get the term Modest Proposal from. So is the question, the reason I use this is Tepper's book a modest proposal? In other words, is it straight up, she thinks we should do this, this is the way to live, or is it's like, it's a satirical prod in the side. She's prodding us in the side and saying, "Yeah, what do you think of this? What do you think of this?" It's like, isn't this an insane way to live? And so we have to judge essentially what is the text asking us to do, and your answer is going to be based on your reading of it. There isn't a right answer. There are many different kinds of reading of this novel. Some people will read it and say, "Yeah, that's exactly it. This is an accurate depiction of what it is to what the patriarchy looks like." The garrisons basically are, yeah, that's recognizable to me. And women's country looks like an ideal. So is it a utopian text? And remember that utopia, topos is place, and eu in Latin is a negator, is, I mean, no place, right? So eu means nothing, no. So is no topos. Is the text an object lesson? Is it a warning? Is it a sort of prophecy in a sort of biblical sense? So, like, let's knock it off, and let's stop doing this. Is it a dystopia that basically, this is what hell will look like? And after all, Achilles is finally told after he's dead that hell is women sobbing for the dead, because he hasn't had to listen to the lamentations of women before. Well, why not, right? Because all he does is kill, and that's what he's good at. Of course, when his beloved Patroclus is killed, and he's like, okay, now he's really pissed. Maybe she wrote the book to piss people off, and men particularly. Maybe she wanted to piss them off. Okay, that's very reasonable too. So these are all possibilities, and we can be sure that Tepper is severely unhappy about the relations between men and women, and men's love of war, basically, which she sees as being intimately connected, I use that word deliberately, to gender and to the phallus, to not even sexual strength, but just to sort of phallus, penis worship, as she calls it. So Stavia has this discussion with Chernin about midway through the book on page 239, and she says, is that kind of behavior considered honorable in the garrison? Because he basically is going to nearly rape her, and she is going to fight him off. He couldn't answer her. Certainly it was with certain kinds of women who came out to the camp for you. She saw the way he looked at her and looked away. Okay, so the news is out. Men prey on women. That's it. They surely do it without imagining that such predation might occur to a sister or a mother, or a loved female who is not one of these. I don't get this. I don't understand. I do not understand how it is that men can say they love their mothers and their sisters, and they're very angry and protective about their mothers and sisters, but then they look at other women as basically prey. And I don't get that. I understand that what they have is a massive collective failure of imagination, that these people that women, in this case, that they're preying upon are human beings who suffer and who have rights, that they're individual beings, and that you don't treat anybody this way. You don't treat any I hope you don't treat any living being this way. But anyway, and this is something we've seen. Again, I was reading a report about this yesterday in COVID, because they've been looking, of course, the numbers of abuse numbers are massively up, and but I was reading, I guess it was a number of women reporting on women's shelters and things like that. And they said, you would think if this is sort of like all people locked down together, with equality, there should be more men being abused. No, it's women being abused by men. So who are the rapists? Men. It's not women. Okay, so Tepper's trying to get at this, right? And she also confronts the reality that sex can be a good part of the world. And so, what is often said about second wave feminism is that it sort of was humorless and sexless. It's not true at all. But the attempt was to balance things out. To say, look, sexuality is part of life. It's not for one. It's not for one group to have and another group not to have or to be used. That's not their job. That's not the job. So Tepper deals with this. She takes it up directly, and it's part of sort of this direct biological. And this is a very second wave. It's not pretty. And she's like, here. It's like, do women get the hots? Yes, they do. Even now, part of her went all wet-crotched at his words. She could feel some inner part of her breaking loose. And you should listen to this, panting against the thick wall between them, ready to dig through it to him like some frantic bitch part with hard little tits and 4 little feet flailing on 193. Boy, this is unrelenting language. There isn't a moment, essentially, of romance in here. She uses deliberately the word bitch in the context of a female dog. It's violent, she's digging. There's this, hard little tits and 4 feet flailing. This is like, you want to talk about women as bitches and hoes? It's like, this is really what the language is. This is the two dogs copulating, basically. So this kind of violence isn't usually part of a utopian fiction. So is it a utopia? It's like it's a complex text. In 1915, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who is a justly famous author, perhaps best known for her short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, which is it's amazing. Oh my God. If you haven't read The Yellow Wallpaper, you got to read it. She also wrote a little short utopian novel called Herland. And it's a really interesting proposal where basically three male aviators land on this plateau which hasn't been discovered, and they find a country which has only women, and there are no men, and the women give birth. Basically, they become pregnant parthenogenically, so they essentially give birth to clone versions of themselves, so that they only ever give birth to girl children. So there are no men in women's country, her land. They're connected to the land, and they're erudite. I mean, they're smart, and they're learned, and they're equitable. I mean, they're very calm, and but they also 3 different women fall for the 3 men, basically, who accidentally fly into her land. And the violence comes only from the men. And there is no sex, but it's 1915. I mean, give us a break here. I mean, you can't just start writing. The novel just would have been banned if she'd put in sex. It's like, no, it's not going to happen. But there are romantic relationships between the 3, all of them very different. The one who is the man who is the most misogynist hooks up with a woman who is the toughest and the most has the least fucks to give, basically, and the sweetest, most romantic man. And there's this he's a southerner, I think, of course, and so he's southern ideals of gentility. Finds this very sweet woman, and she thinks he's great, but also she knows that he's an idiot. and the middle is just like the 3 bears. the three bears go to her land, and the middle one, who is just right, is the narrator, and he finds a very equitable woman who explains, as most guides do in utopias or dystopias, how things work. And so she takes him on a tour. And she ultimately, Gilman wrote a second book, a sequel to this, called With Her in Our Land. That's right. So they actually become a couple, and they come back with her. So the narrator, who's, I don't think he has a name, I'm trying to remember, but he comes back with his partner, and it's a very interesting modernist idea of a partnership. I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, like this, oh my God, Gilman was so ahead of her time. And interestingly enough, she wrote a paper. She wrote something like 15,000 words a week. It was incredible. It was like, wow, she was cranking it out. Called The Forerunner, and she published it herself. Amazing. And it actually really was. I mean, she really was ahead of her time. So there's this follow-up novel. Anyway, I'm a fan of Charlotte Gilman. Many people are. I count myself among them. Anyway, so Tepper, and the thing is that when Tepper writes a book like Gate to Women's Country, it's like, it's based in her land. She knows it, and everybody else knows it too. And Tepper speaks sympathetically about women who are, she says, mixed up, wanting all the romantic, dramatic emotions, deathless love, undying promises. And Stavia says, that's just Myra, her crazy sister who doesn't get it, basically. She said uncertainly, well, it's any of us, Stavvy, says Morgo on page 72. And this is really such a fair moment, where Morgo, despite the fact that she, really clicks with Stavia and really doesn't click with Myra, still, she understands that what Myra wants, people want. Like, why wouldn't you want a beautiful romance? It's not a bad thing to want a romance. It's a problem to have in your head a princess ship, if that's your ideal. If this is what you're basing your idea of reality on, that's going to be a serious problem, right? I mean, you're going to have to bend reality into all kinds of shapes, if what you've got in your head is princess, okay, or prince, whatever. So Stavia would sort of like to know that she's immune to love, but at the same time she's realistic. But at the same time, she's gonna fall in love, and she kind of wants to fall in love. But so it's that's why I think this is a much more nuanced novel, as they would say. So have a look at this little clip, this little funny little clip from Happy Texas, about love. Now, in this particular clip, you're going to see the two characters are working at home. Not because of COVID, but to make a display for the school play and for children. And they're talking. Now, the male character, played by Jeremy Northam here, is that right? I think that's right. Or Jeremy Northam, that's right, is actually a thief who's on the run from the feds. He's been in prison. And he, to pass himself off, essentially, he and his runner, Steve Zahn, who's very funny, pass themselves off as a gay couple who are running a talent show, basically. And so he's supposed to be queer. And so she assumes that he is queer. But really, of course, he's falling in love with her. He's falling in love with her. Okay. So have a look.
We've been together 6 years next month.
6 years of what? Breakfast and phone calls? Sounds kind of convenient. Doesn't sound very permanent.
Well, I can wait.
What for?
When you're in your 20s and everything's gonna happen someday, and then you get a little past your 20s and someday is happening or has happened. Your dad dies and you go from being Josephine to Joe, president of the bank. Everybody starts depending on you. Your love life sort of takes a back seat. And you start to realize that maybe your ultimate dreams are just unattainable. I don't know. I guess I'm still waiting for someday. But on the plus side, he does do something every once in a while that feels worth waiting for.
What? What's that?
It tells me that it loves me.
Oh, come on. Love you is easy. Men say it all the time. Men say they love their work. Love their cars. Love their freedom. She should be telling you something more than that.
Like what?
He should take you in his arms, he'd look you straight in your eyes. He should say, I don't know, he should say, I may have seen a woman in my life who was considered prettier, but I've never seen one more beautiful.
When you laugh and your eyes are happy, I think no matter what, I'm a success. He should say, I want you. Yeah. I want you, Joe.
You'll never be second to anything else because I want you more than anything else. I want to kiss you. I want to breathe in the air out of you.
Right. Like some straight guy's ever gonna say that.
All right. Okay, so now you've seen this cute little piece where Josephine, who is the town, essentially the center of the town, and this is an interesting text. I mean, I like Happy Texas in many ways, partly because it's funny, partly because it's got good people in it, but mostly because it's really well written, and it's a smart take on the gender struggle that men have that women don't really have. Is sort of the point, in the sense that that's not fair. I think the problem is that men have a problem with masculinity, with defining masculinity, and women are increasingly have their feet on the ground, I think, about understanding or connecting with the different kinds of womanhood that there are possible. I think it's taken men a long time. Anyway, okay. So we'll leave that alone. Anyway, I'm happy to have this discussion. I can happily bitch about men's behavior, and the way that men have misconstrued what masculinity is, and a lot of this course is about that. Obviously, that masculinity is a trap. The way that it's formulated in the West, specifically in North America, particularly in America, is a trap for men. It's a trap for everybody, but it does incredible violence to women and everybody else. Okay, one of the other issues that Tepper must deal with from a social engineering aspect is the problem of queerness, and this is why partly I use this clip. And this is where Tepper really fails, and it's unfortunate. And for some people, this is the end of the book for them. They're like, no, I can't tolerate it. And I understand that. I have had this discussion with friends of mine, and I get it. If you look at this and you think, but I can't stand this, it's like, I get it. In 1984, when this book was published, this position even then was unacceptable in general in the feminist world. It's a very unusual position that Tepper takes up. But on page 76, this is how she deals with queerness of any kind, because what she doesn't deal with is whether or not the men and boys in the warriors camp have sexual relations. If they're following a Greek model, they would. It was just sort of part of the world was that men would marry women in the Greek world and have children because that's how you propagated the family, basically, and kept the power. But men had close relationships, boys and older men. Older men deliberately took on boys who they initiated into sexual practices, queer sexual practices, and it was just sort of part of the thing. Like this was just part of a great part of the culture, which is why in 300 the Spartans attack the Greeks for being, or the Achaeans really, but the Greeks for being boy lovers, the Athenians, because it's part of the culture. So this is something Tepper doesn't take up, which is interesting in the garrisons, that there are no love relationships between the men. And there are no love relationships between the women either in gate to women's country, in women's country, or even in the camps where the prostitutes are, or where people who don't want to live in this rigid society that the women have. And so she talks about on page 76 the gay syndrome. Now we recognize this, and we recognized it then, and we recognize it now as being hugely problematic, which is solved by hormone therapy. It's like, oh great. So there are no queer couples in women's country, and I don't know why not, except that you can only assume. Most of us have only assumed that Tepper is uneasy about this issue. She later deals with it somewhat better in Sideshow, a novel called Sideshow, although it still comes out as a sort of resolutely heterosexual. There's a resolutely heterosexual outcome to these sort of androgynous figures that she sets up. So this is one of the major problems. The major problem in the novel, as far as I'm concerned, is this issue here. And if it seriously pisses you off, it's like, that's fine. My plea to you is, please don't throw out the whole novel, because Tepper, at this point in her life, was short-sighted and stupid about, and was homophobic, basically. Please, I get it.